Trump's victory has an impact on everyone, but the one leader who was looking most carefully was Zelenskyy, because they were very worried about the impact of a Trump presidency on the future course of the Russia-Ukraine war. We've seen Zelenskyy now speak about the possibility of some kind of a political solution. Do you see this war end in the next several months? Or pause?
I think that there's a good prospect that there's a deal to be had. And the truth is, it was already moving toward that. Because over the last several months, it has become clear that the Russians are not going to be displaced from the 20% of Ukraine that they hold. The Ukrainians have made very brave, valiant efforts. They've dislodged them a little bit from the positions that they held in that first flurry in 2022 when they took over parts of Ukraine. But Crimea, the core pieces of Donbass that they hold, they are going to hold. Now, on the other hand, it's also worth saying, the Russians have made no advances either. The Russians have not been able to take much more of Ukraine.
But that could change unless Zelensky's army keeps getting weapons and supplies.
So that's why I say there's a deal to be had, which is if Trump makes clear to Putin, look, there's a deal to be had roughly along the lines we are at now. You know, we can freeze the lines now. But if you try to make more advances, I will keep funding the Ukrainians.
But is he interested in funding the Ukrainians? I mean, you'd like to hope
but that's why I say there's a deal to be had if Trump wants the deal. But the deal does involve the threat to Putin that he will keep funding Zelenskyy. So here's the way I think about it. There's a great opportunity for Donald Trump to say, I made the deal, Joe Biden didn't, I made it, it happened on my watch. And
I ended the war.
I'm the great deal maker. I ended the war. But it does require him to be tough on Putin. Now, on the other hand, I think what you're hinting at, Rahul, is he doesn't seem to like the Ukrainians. Remember, he tried to blackmail Zelenskyy in the first term. And Zelenskyy, by the way, did not get blackmailed. Don't forget, that's a very important thing that people sometimes forget, which is Zelenskyy defied Trump in that, and Trump must not have liked that. A lot of people around him, his son, for example, is openly anti-Ukrainian. Tulsi is openly anti-Ukrainian. So, there's two conflicting strategies here. If I were the Ukrainians, I would try to focus on this idea that Trump can be the peacemaker. He can make the deal. But for the deal to be made, there has to be a real threat. If he does that, as I say, you freeze the lines, and you have to give Ukraine some security guarantee. That's the other part, which I wonder about where Trump would be. Because if you don't give them a security guarantee, Ukraine will collapse. Because nobody is going to invest in a country that you think the Russians could go back in 2 years. Even Ukrainian young men who have fled won't come back. In fact, you might have more exodus out of Ukraine, because if there's a peace deal, the Ukrainians will have to lift martial law and lift the mandatory draft and things like that, and the young men will leave. So you'll have a basket case in Ukraine. So the way to end this war is clear. The question is, it does require that Trump be tough on Putin. He'll also have to be tough on Zelenskyy and say, look, you've got to take this deal.
Putin thinks of all of this. He could say, I don't think Trump's going to keep funding Ukraine. I just need to hold my ground. Maybe I can finish off the job I started.
Right. So if Putin thinks that, then you have to keep funding. The key is you have to keep funding, because so far what we've seen is if the US and Europe continue to support Ukraine, they're willing to fight, they're willing to die, and they've done remarkably well. Remember, Russia is 10 times the economy of Ukraine's, 4 times the population. And it's right next door. This is not some faraway imperial conquest. It's right next door. And they've still not been able to move beyond those lines that they've held. They've still not been able to take Kyiv. They've not been able to take the other major cities. Ukraine is able to export all its grain through the Black Sea. So if you consider the mismatch, the Ukrainians, as David, have really stood up to a Goliath. And the Russian economy is suffering enormously. The other leverage that Trump has over Putin is the sanctions are very tough. Now, being an oil exporting economy, Russia will always have some cash, and they can always build their army. But they're doing it really at the cost of the rest of society and the rest of the Russian economy, which is really in a kind of increasingly primitive state because they don't have access to technology, they don't have access to capital markets. So there's a big upside for Putin to end the war.
Iran has threatened to strike back against Israel after the missile strikes. Nothing's happened so far, and now Donald Trump is in power. Where do you see the Israel-Iran conflict go from here? Will they just keep threatening each other but not really striking and escalating? Or could Benjamin Netanyahu say, here's my chance to go in and once and forever attempt to alter the map of West Asia or change the configuration?
It's very intelligent that you're asking it about the Israel-Iran, because that's the central dynamic at play right now. The Gaza thing is now basically over, and it's a separate issue. It's what Israel should do with the occupied territories, how it should handle the Palestinians, and you know, just put that aside, both politically and humanitarian catastrophe that it is. What is going on in the north is the central strategic game. The Iranians have been trying to play a game through their proxies, Hezbollah, the Houthis, the militias in Syria and Iran, and Hamas, of putting Israel on edge, but also putting the Gulf Arabs on edge. You know, they allowed the Houthis to attack Saudi Arabia's oil facilities. The Israelis have decided enough. We are going to reestablish deterrence, and we are going to strike hard, both at Hezbollah and in Iran. And what they discovered was that Iran and Hezbollah were much weaker than people realized. And they have, I think, very effectively reestablished deterrence, where they've destroyed Hezbollah to a large extent militarily, though politically it remains a very powerful organization. And what they've shown and they've exposed is that Iran is a paper tiger. They've now destroyed all of Iran's air defenses. All, by the way, Russian-built air defenses. And India, please take note. The value of Russian kit is not very high these days. They were able to, in a few hours, destroy the entire Russian-built Iranian air defenses. So Iran is now naked. I think Israel is happy with where things are now, because what they're, in a sense, saying to Iran is, you do something else. You take more provocative moves. One of your proxies strikes us again, and we can destroy your military facilities, your cities, your nuclear research labs. So in a way, it's up to the Iranians. And the Iranians have said they're going to strike back at Israel. But they've said it a while ago. They haven't done anything yet. I think that's where the game is. If they were to strike, the Israelis could very easily absolutely destroy either Iran's military bases or even parts of their nuclear facility. For the nuclear stuff, they need American bombs. Their bombs are not powerful enough. But, I mean, they're special bunker busting bombs they need that they do not have access to right now. But they could set Iran back very, very substantially. So I think what this whole episode has showed, Israel is the region's superpower now. It is the military superpower of the Middle East. And by the way, it's the technology superpower of the Middle East. And a new deterrence has been established between Israel and Iran.
How weak is the Iranian state in your lens? If Benjamin Netanyahu were to push and try and orchestrate regime change, I mean, there is discontent. We've seen that in all the riots and the protests. Would they be able to pull it off, or would it be a very foolish mistake?
The thing about dictatorships is that they seem eternal until the day they collapse, and then it seems inevitable, and you can't believe it went on for so long. So I'm very hesitant. It's a tough dictatorship. But my own sense is that the Iranian regime has always been able to mix repression with patronage in a way that gives it a certain stability. Iran is a very traditional society, religious society. The Shia clergy it's very different from a Sunni state where the clergy have a certain kind of political role and respect. And you can see this even in just by looking at Iraq next door. In Iraq, which is a free democracy, the Shia tend to vote for parties that are very closely aligned with Shia religious groups, with Shia religious figures like Muqtada al-Sadr and things like that. So, it's not surprising that the Ayatollahs have some support. I don't think it's a majority by any means, but if you're a dictatorship, and in the rural areas, among old people, among more religious people, you have some support. Then you dole out patronage and you increase your support. And then you crack down hard on all these urban liberals. That seems to have been the formula that has kept the Iranian regime in power, and my gut is that it's still a workable formula. As I say, you never know with the dictatorship, but what I will say for sure is we have now had many experiments at regime change in the Middle East in the last 20 years. Iraq, Afghanistan, if you think of that as the greater Middle East, Libya, Syria. It's a very messy proposition. You know, regardless of whether it succeeds as it did in Iraq, as it fails as it did in Syria, you have hundreds of thousands of people, if not millions, get displaced, hundreds of thousands die. What you end up with often not that much better than what you started with. So I would say to anyone, you know, thinking of regime changes in Iran as a strategy, and remember, this is a big country. This is not some small. Just be careful what be careful what you wish for.
This has been a masterclass in foreign affairs. Thank you very much for enlightening us with your insights and very sharp observations about where we are. And you've spoken a lot about where we are likely to head. So it's always great to hear from you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rahul. Always a pleasure.
Thank you so much.